The morning the inspector showed up, I was watering the small garden beside my porch. I remember the way his clipboard looked, shiny, new, and official. His name tag read City of Belford, Building Department. He looked around like he'd already made up his mind. "Ma'am, I'm here about a report filed against you," he said. My stomach dropped. A report? For what? Unauthorized structure on the premises. Backyard shed, recently built. My hand tightened on the hose. I'd spent weeks building that shed myself, a little workspace for my art business. Every nail, every brushstroke was mine. Who reported it? I asked. He glanced at his paper. Neighbor. A Mr. Howard. Of course. Howard. My next-door neighbor, with his spotless lawn and constant glare, had hated my renovation project since the day I moved in. He said my tools were too noisy, my yard too messy. I forced a smile. So what happens now? Investigation, he said. If you don't have a permit, you may face a fine or demolition order. As he left, Howard waved from his porch, smug, satisfied, like a man who had just won a small, cruel game. I waved back. But inside, I was burning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that lazy smirk, the way he leaned on his railing as if he owned the street. My name is Amelia, and I don't scare easily. I had moved to Belford after my divorce, determined to start over. The shed was supposed to be my sanctuary, a place to paint, to breathe again. Now it was a violation. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, reading city code. Permit this. Permit that. Every line felt like a punishment for trying to create something. At midnight, I saw movement through my kitchen window. Howard stood outside, flashlight in hand, inspecting my fence line. He wasn't even subtle. I opened the back door. "Can I help you?" He jumped slightly, then sneered. "Just making sure your shed isn't breaking any more laws." "Go home, Howard." "It's called civic duty, sweetheart," he said, grinning. "Some of us care about the rules." The next morning, a bright orange notice was taped to my shed, "Stop work order." I stared at it for a long time, the paper fluttering in the wind like a small, cruel flag. Howard whistled as he watered his grass. The inspector's follow-up visit came 3 days later. The verdict was worse than I expected. "Unapproved construction," he said flatly. "You'll need to remove it or apply for retroactive permits, which could take months." "Months?" I repeated. He shrugged. "Or pay the fine and tear it down." "Your call." Howard's laughter carried over the fence. It took everything in me not to say something reckless. When the inspector left, I went inside, poured coffee, and sat in silence. I thought about the shed, my brushes, my half-finished canvases, the smell of wood and paint. He wanted it gone. That night, I stood by the window again. Howard had friends over. Laughter, music, the clinking of beer bottles drifted across the yards. He liked to celebrate small victories. But as I watched him, something inside me shifted. The sadness burned away, replaced by something sharper, focus. I realized I didn't just want to rebuild my shed. I wanted him to pay. I didn't know how yet. But I would find a way. A week later, I went downtown to appeal the violation. The clerk, a tired woman named Sandra, looked over my file. "You can file for a retroactive permit," she said, "but your neighbor's complaint complicates things. He claims you built too close to his property line." Of course he did. I left the office frustrated. Outside, Belford streets buzzed with weekend markets and food trucks. Life went on, people smiling and laughing. I passed a small booth marked County Foreclosure Notices. A tall man was pinning a new sheet to the board. Rows of addresses, names, auction dates. I almost kept walking. But then I saw it. Address, 417 Maple Court. Owner, Howard Grant. Auction date, October 12th. I froze. That was his house. I read it twice to be sure. Maybe it was a typo. But no, the parcel number matched. Howard was 3 months behind on payments. I felt my pulse quicken. The universe had just opened a door. I tore off the notice copy and folded it into my bag, heart racing. Howard didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath his perfect lawn had already started to crack. For the next 2 weeks, I watched him carefully. Every morning, he left for work at exactly 7:45. He drove a blue SUV that gleamed like a trophy. He worked at a local insurance firm, the kind that looked spotless from the outside but bled people dry with fine print. He came home at 6, checked his mail, yelled at delivery drivers for blocking his driveway, then sat on his porch pretending to read. He had no idea I knew. I called the county office to confirm the listing. "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "Property at 417 Maple Court will be auctioned next month. Bank repossession. Unpaid mortgage and back taxes." "How much is owed?" I asked. "About $160,000. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in stunned silence. It wasn't cheap, but it was possible. Clearview Art Studio, my small business, had done well that year. I had savings, a modest line of credit, and one thing Howard didn't: motivation. As I stared out at his neatly trimmed hedges, I made a quiet promise. He wanted to play by the rules? Fine. I'd win by them. And I'd do it legally, publicly, and spectacularly. The first thing I learned about property auctions was that they don't care about emotions. It's just numbers, papers, and cold decisions made in fluorescent rooms. I spent my evenings researching. I read about bidding procedures, liens, minimum deposits, and how the highest bidder wins if they can pay within 30 days. It felt impossible at first. But the more I read, the more it felt like fate had handed me a blueprint for justice. I started saving aggressively. I sold a few old paintings from my art series online and withdrew my small investment account. Every dollar mattered. Meanwhile, Howard kept living like nothing was wrong. He replaced his mailbox, installed new porch lights, and yelled at a teenage delivery boy for stepping on his grass. He had no clue his house was slipping away, inch by inch. Every night, I checked the county website. The auction date didn't change, October 12th. One night, I stood by the window and looked at my shed, still under that orange stop work order. I whispered to myself, "You took my shed, Howard. Let's see how you like losing something that's yours." By the time September rolled in, my plan was solid. I had spoken to a banker friend, Maya, who handled small business loans. When I told her I was thinking about buying property, she smiled. "Vacation home?" "Something like that," I said. She explained what I needed: pre-approval, proof of funds, and a down payment for the auction. I gave her everything within a week. It was all legitimate. No tricks. No laws bent. Howard was watching me, though. I caught him once, peering over the fence as I measured a part of my yard. "Trying to build something else without asking," he said. I smiled. "Not this time." He smirked, not realizing he had just helped me hide my excitement. Inside, I was shaking with anticipation. I had built my business from nothing. This would be no different. At night, I sketched out budgets and timelines, just like when I planned my art installations. Except this time, the masterpiece wasn't a painting, it was revenge. Every brushstroke was a step closer to seeing his for sale sign come down, with my name on the deed. One Saturday, I drove past the county courthouse, pretending I was there for errands. I wanted to see the place where it would all happen. Outside, a few people waited on the steps: investors, landlords, quiet men in suits holding coffee. I watched one auction from the back of the crowd. A small property went for half its worth. It was quick, almost casual. It made my pulse race. That would be me soon, calm on the outside, lightning on the inside. Back home, I started noticing small things about Howard's house. His porch light flickered. His lawn wasn't as green. Sometimes, I saw him pacing at night, talking on his phone. One evening, he slammed his car door so hard that a bird flew from his tree. Something was happening, maybe he knew about the foreclosure now. Good. Let him feel the pressure build slowly. I wasn't cruel, but I wanted him to understand the weight of what he'd done to me, that feeling of being powerless when someone uses rules to ruin your peace. Except now, I wasn't powerless anymore. Now, I had the law on my side. The first time I saw Howard's wife cry, it almost broke my plan. It was a Tuesday evening. I was taking the trash out when I heard muffled voices next door. Howard's voice was sharp, angry. Hers was trembling. "You said it was handled, Howard," she said. "It is. The bank can't just take our home." Her words cut through me. For a moment, guilt crept in, the kind that whispers you've gone too far. But then I remembered how he had smirked when the inspector nailed that orange notice to my shed. He hadn't cared about my feelings, my effort, or my dreams. He had laughed while I stood there humiliated. So I walked back inside, shut the door, and forced myself to stay focused. I reminded myself this wasn't about cruelty, it was about balance. The next morning, he was back to his old self, shouting at a delivery van for parking too close to his driveway. Any sympathy I had vanished. He had made his bed. I was just waiting to pull the covers off in public. The day before the auction, I could barely eat. My nerves felt like electric wires. I triple-checked my documents, cashier's check, and ID. Everything was ready. At 6 p.m., I saw Howard outside polishing his SUV. He looked proud again, confident, like a man convinced everything would work out. He still didn't know. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. That night, I sat in my unfinished shed. The air smelled like wood and paint, a mix of past failure and future victory. I opened my notebook, where I had written one sentence weeks ago. "Make him regret underestimating you." I traced over those words with a pen, slow and steady. When I finally went to bed, I dreamed of the gavel hitting the table, that sharp sound that would end everything for him. Tomorrow, his pride would meet reality. And I would be right there to watch it happen. The morning of the auction felt like a storm building in my chest. I dressed in a plain navy dress, tied my hair back, and carried my folder like armor. When I arrived, the courthouse steps buzzed with quiet tension. Investors spoke in low voices. Papers rustled. The air smelled faintly of coffee and dust. Howard wasn't there, at least, not yet. Inside the small auction room, a county official stood behind a wooden podium. A list of properties hung on the wall. When I saw 417 Maple Court, my hands trembled. "Bidding will start at $160,000, the official announced. My pulse pounded in my ears. Two men in suits started the bidding. Their tones were calm, professional. I waited. When it slowed at 175, I raised my hand. 180, I said clearly. The room shifted. The men glanced at me, sizing me up. Then one of them countered. 185. I waited, smiled slightly, and said, 195. Silence. The gavel hit wood. Sold, to bidder number 42. It took me a second to realize that was me. My knees went weak. I had just bought Howard's house. When I walked out of the courthouse, the sky had turned golden. People passed by, unaware that a war had just quietly ended. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, heart thudding. It was done. The house, his house, was mine now, at least once the paperwork cleared. I whispered, "You did it, Amelia." The feeling wasn't joy exactly. It was deeper. A mix of relief, disbelief, and justice finally balanced. 2 days later, I received the confirmation letter from the county. "Congratulations. You are the new owner of 417 Maple Court." I traced my fingers over the words like they were art. That weekend, Howard was outside trimming his hedges when a city vehicle pulled up. A man handed him an envelope, the notice to vacate. From my porch, I saw his face drain of color. He ripped the paper open, read it, then shouted something I couldn't hear. His wife came out, confused. He threw the paper to the ground and stormed inside. I picked up my tea and took a quiet sip. Sometimes, karma didn't need fire. It only needed patience. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip by Monday. "Did you hear about Howard?" my mail carrier asked, eyes wide. "House went to auction." I just smiled politely. "Really? That's surprising." I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Howard avoided me for days. He still mowed the lawn, but slower now, like it was borrowed time. His wife stopped waving from their porch. One evening, I caught him staring at me, long, cold, and suspicious. Finally, he shouted, "You think this is funny?" I looked up from my garden. "What?" "Don't play dumb, Amelia." "You knew." I blinked innocently. "Knew what, Howard?" He stepped closer to the fence, fists clenched. "That my house was being stolen out from under me." "Stolen?" I tilted my head. "You mean the same way you tried to save the neighborhood by calling the city on me?" His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I smiled, calm and steady. "We all follow the rules, remember?" He turned and stomped back inside. That night, for the first time since I moved to Belford, the air around my house felt still, peaceful. Justice didn't always shout. Sometimes, it whispered. The moving trucks arrived a week later. I watched from my porch as men carried out boxes, furniture, and the pieces of Howard's pride. His wife stood near the curb, wiping her eyes. I didn't feel joy, but I didn't feel sorry either. He had chosen this. He had built his life on control, controlling his lawn, his image, even his neighbors. When one small thing didn't fit his perfect picture, he tried to destroy it. But rules cut both ways. He spotted me across the yard and froze. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he called. I stood. "I'm enjoying my tea." His jaw tightened. "You'll regret this." I shrugged. "I don't think so. The title's in my name now. I have plans for that house." He glared at me for a long moment, then climbed into his car and drove off without another word. The sound of his tires screeching down the road was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. I looked at the empty driveway next door and whispered, "Goodbye, Howard." 2 weeks later, I unlocked the front door of my new property, his old home. It smelled like dust and aftershave. The living room was bare, echoing with faint memories of arrogance. I walked from room to room, fingertips brushing the walls. The house was well built, he'd been proud of it, and I understood why. In the backyard, I stood where he used to scold delivery drivers and glare at me. From that spot, you could see my shed. The one he tried to erase. I smiled. I decided then that I wouldn't sell the house. I'd turn it into something better, an art studio for the community. A space where people could create freely, without judgment or permits ruining dreams. That evening, as the sun dipped below the fence line, I turned off the lights and looked out the window toward my home next door. For the first time in months, everything felt balanced. He'd taken my peace. And I'd taken his kingdom. Fair trade. Turning Howard's old house into a studio took months of work, but I loved every second. The first morning I walked in with paint buckets and tools, the air felt lighter, like the house itself was relieved to have a new purpose. I tore down his heavy curtains, painted the walls white, and let the sunlight flood in. Friends from my art circle helped. We brought in easels, stools, and shelves of brushes. The sound of laughter replaced Howard's angry voice. When the studio finally opened, people came from all over Belford. They painted, sculpted, and smiled. Some even said it felt like magic in there. I named it Maple Light Studio, a soft nod to the street where everything changed. Sometimes, I'd catch myself looking out the back window toward my house. My shed still stood, still unpermitted, but I didn't care anymore. It wasn't about revenge now. It was about transformation. Still, there were nights when I'd see a blue SUV parked down the street, headlights off, engine idling. I didn't need to guess who it was. Howard wasn't gone. He was watching. And part of me knew his story wasn't finished yet. It started small. A few snide comments at the cafe, whispered gossip that Amelia stole her neighbor's home. I ignored it. But soon, I began finding little signs that Howard was back in town. My mailbox had been left open. Footprints in the dew near my fence. One morning, a dead plant from my garden had been pulled up and thrown on my porch. I didn't scare easily, but I stayed alert. When I told Maya, my banker friend, she frowned. He's angry, Amelia. Be careful. I'm not afraid of him, I said. He can't touch me anymore. Still, I added motion lights outside my house and cameras by the studio doors. Then, one evening, a rock smashed through my front window. The police came, took a report, and found tire tracks leading to the street. Do you have any enemies? The officer asked. I almost laughed. Just one. But I think I already beat him. That night, as I swept up glass, I realized Howard wasn't just bitter, he was unraveling. He couldn't stand the idea that the person he tried to crush was now thriving. And people like him, they always come back when they lose control. The next time I saw him, it was a bright Saturday morning. He walked straight into Maple Light Studio like he belonged there. Howard, I said evenly, setting down my brush. He looked worse than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. So this is what you did with my house, he said, his voice sharp. Our house now, I corrected. But yes, I turned it into something beautiful. He laughed bitterly. You think painting over the walls erases what you did? I stepped closer. You did this, Howard. You built walls around everyone. I just knocked them down. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he looked around, at the students laughing, the sunlight, the art, and something in him cracked. You ruined me, he said quietly. No, I said. You ruined yourself when you decided to be cruel. He stared at me like he wanted to argue, then turned and left without another word. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 nights later, the studio alarm went off. When I arrived, the smell of smoke filled the air. My heart dropped. Someone had tried to set fire to Maple Light Studio. By the time the fire department arrived, most of the damage was contained, but the back wall was blackened, and several canvases were gone. The officers found the remnants of a gas can near the fence. Any idea who could have done this? One asked. I didn't hesitate. Yes. My former neighbor, Howard Grant. They took notes and promised to investigate. The next day, the story hit the local paper. Community art studio survives attempted arson. The town rallied around me. Donations poured in. People offered to repaint, rebuild, and restore what had been lost. Howard, meanwhile, vanished again. Until one afternoon, the police came knocking. They had found surveillance footage from a nearby shop. It showed Howard's blue SUV parked behind the studio minutes before the fire started. He was arrested that same evening. I watched the news later, his mugshot staring back at me, the same man who once gloated about rules and permits, now facing charges for breaking real laws. Justice, poetic and complete. For the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. The trial was quick. The evidence was clear. Howard pled guilty to arson and property damage. He got 2 years in prison. When I saw him in court, he wouldn't look at me. But I looked at him, calm, steady, unflinching. Afterward, I walked outside into the bright sunlight. Maya met me on the steps with a smile. "It's over," she said. I nodded. Finally. The community rebuilt Maple Light Studio bigger than before. The smell of new paint filled the halls. The walls glowed brighter, like they carried our story, one of destruction turned into creation. Sometimes, people asked if I regretted anything. I always said no. Howard had taught me something powerful, that standing your ground isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to let bitterness win. From my studio window, I could still see my little shed, untouched, imperfect, and still standing. That's when I realized something. He had tried to destroy me with rules. I had rebuilt myself with grace. And in the end, I was the one who stayed. Howard served only 18 months before being released on probation. Belford is a small town, news travels faster than wind. I heard he moved into a rented apartment across town, near the industrial district. Sometimes people whispered when they saw him at the grocery store. Others avoided him. He had become a shadow of the proud man he once was. I didn't celebrate. I just kept living. Maple Light Studio was thriving. Every weekend we hosted art fairs, kids' classes, and community nights. The same city officials who once handed me a violation now attended our events with smiles and donations. One afternoon, I found a letter slipped under the studio door. It was from Howard. "You won, Amelia. I lost everything. I hope you're proud." I folded the paper and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't need to reply. Some wars end without words. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I painted for the first time in months, broad, fearless strokes of red and gold. The canvas felt alive again. Justice had a color after all, bright, burning, and calm. A few months later, I got a call from the county. They wanted to recognize Maple Light Studio with a civic award for outstanding community renewal. When I stood on the small stage at City Hall, I looked out at the crowd, families, students, even city inspectors. And then I saw him. Howard, sitting in the back row. His hair was gray now, his shoulders slumped. But he was there, listening. As I accepted the award, I said, "Belford taught me that rules keep us safe, but kindness keeps us human. This studio stands because this town believed in second chances." People clapped. Cameras flashed. Howard lowered his eyes. After the ceremony, he approached slowly. "You didn't have to say that," he murmured. "I didn't do it for you," I said softly. "But maybe it helps both of us." He nodded once, almost grateful, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. For the first time, I felt peace instead of anger when I thought of him. Sometimes justice ends where forgiveness quietly begins. Life moved forward. Seasons changed, and the studio became the heart of our little town. Kids painted murals, retirees took pottery, and local musicians filled the halls on Friday nights. One day, a reporter asked me to share the story behind Maple Light Studio. I hesitated but agreed. I told her about a shed, a permit, and a neighbor who didn't believe in me. But I also told her about what came after, the resilience, the rebuilding, the way community can grow from ashes. The article went viral online. Messages poured in from strangers who'd faced small injustices of their own. They said the story made them want to stand up, build again, and move forward. That was when I realized my revenge had transformed into something larger, inspiration. Howard had tried to silence me, but instead he'd given me a louder voice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sometimes, the people who try to break you end up writing your success story for you. A year later, the town invited me to paint a public mural near the courthouse, the same courthouse where I'd once bought Howard's home. I decided to paint 2 houses side by side, one old, gray, and crumbling, the other bright, open, and full of color. Between them stood a single blooming tree. When the mural was unveiled, people gasped at the detail. Some saw it as a story of growth. Others, redemption. But I knew the truth, it was both. After the ceremony, a letter arrived in the studio mail. It was from Howard's wife. "He's leaving Belford for good," she wrote. "He said he can't stay where his mistakes live on every street corner. He wanted me to thank you for teaching him what humility looks like." I folded the letter gently. Not all endings need applause. Some just need understanding. I looked at the mural again that evening. The sunlight hit the painted windows, making them glow like real ones. I smiled. The story was finished. It's been 5 years now. The shed in my backyard still stands, weathered but strong. The orange notice faded long ago, yet I keep it pinned inside the studio, a reminder of where it all began. When new artists come in, nervous and unsure, I tell them, build what you love, even if someone tells you not to. At night, I sometimes walk past 417 Maple Court. The lights glow softly through the windows where people now gather to paint and laugh. The house hums with life again. I stop at the gate, breathe in the scent of rain and cedar, and whisper, "We made it." Howard's name is only a memory now, carried away by time. But the lesson he left behind stays with me. True power isn't in revenge, it's in rebuilding so completely that no one can ever tear you down again. As I turn to leave, the streetlights flicker on, casting gold across both houses. The night feels warm, quiet, and whole. And I know I've finally come home.